Welcome to the Care Right podcast, your go-to resource for all things elder care. Guiding us through this journey is Annalee Kruger, the founder of Care Right Incorporated, and she has been steadfastly supporting families across the United States. Each episode brings you expert insights, innovative strategies, and practical advice, ensuring that you're well equipped to provide the best possible care for your loved ones. Expect to gain valuable knowledge, learn from real-life stories, and get inspired to take action in your own caregiving journey. So buckle up as we dive into an in-depth discussion of elder care planning and together embrace the journey of caring for aging loved ones on the Care Right podcast.
Welcome to today's podcast. I'm Carl Frank with A&I Wealth Management, and we're continuing our conversation this week with Annalee Kruger from Care Right. Hello, Annalee. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
You are so welcome. It's a pleasure to have you. And Nathan Merrill, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. We were just talking before we hit the record button. I'm starting to panic now with all the things I think I need to get in place. But we just finished talking about kind of the onboarding families, having that family meeting and developing a plan.
Right.
And I'm curious to learn a little bit about some of the details that are contained in the plan. I'm looking at a piece of paper that may highlight what some of the things people need to consider, what some of the things we might not even be thinking about. And then I think we also want to just hear some of your experiences, your case studies, as it were, so that people can put some of this esoteric stuff into practical situations. But tell me, if you can, a little bit about some of these things, like what it would mean to have or how. So I'm just going to throw out some words. You decide which ones you want to talk about. Companionship, mobility plan, driving plan, senior safe home plan. Like, what do these things mean?
Yeah. So driving plan. So one of the things that I talk with families about, because, the challenge, I know you're like, can you just ever have like a short, concise answer? And not really.
I'm not looking for that. So
Okay,
don't worry about it.
Because so here's the thing. So when I talk about a driving plan, we're talking about, okay, what if mom and dad can't drive anymore? Are they even safe to drive? One of the questions the kids always have is, I don't know how safe they are. Well, when's the last time you rode with them? Well, families don't live near each other. So sometimes they're only seeing each other once a year or every other year until things start to really fall apart. And then they're back and forth literally all of the time, like every month or every 2 weeks when things are really dire. So one of the things I talk about with the clients, with our Care Right families is, for driving safety, one easy visual thing that you can do is when you're home, or have a local person, walk around the car. Are there new dings, scratches? Does the car look like it's unscathed from being driven? Look at the garage frame. Is it dented? Did they run into the door? Those are different things to look at for driving safety. But also the other thing people don't think about, and this is why we have it in the grab and go binder as well, but like insurance, because sometimes a lot of times these family caregivers are just so overwhelmed in the day-to-day stuff that it doesn't occur to them to make sure that the driver's license is is current, or that the car insurance is current. And so all things driving, we have a whole process that we go through. That's a whole topic that we talk about with our clients when we're putting their aging plan in place. So that's driving safety.
So I want to just jump in and say something comical here, because one of my favorite comedians talks about how her mom moved into a facility in Florida that's like this huge, like massive acreage facility, and how her mom only takes right-handed turns. So I guess one of those things you could look for is the signal, the turning signal stick worn out on one side.
That's funny. So driving safety also want to, because when I first started as a social worker, we had squat we really did. I'm going to be frank about this. We had, it was just, we just didn't have a lot of resources back then, but now we have technology. So now we have apps. So you can get like Life 360 as on a phone app. And I use it on my dad because my dad drives and he's a very safe driver because I ride with him every week and he's a good driver. But that way, if I'm like, he said he was going to be home at 3 and it's now 4, where is he? So then I can just literally look him up on my app and be like, oh, because it tells you like really accurately where
Yeah.
he, I'm like, oh, he's at Walmart. Okay, that's
That's
good.
why we got my mom an Apple Watch, was for the
Yep,
fall feature, for the location feature, I mean,
yep,
it even has some health kind of monitoring things that
that's
are
right.
helpful.
Yep. And so, we part of their aging plan that we're doing, because that's different than what we taught Carl with the financial planners. That's an elder plan. That's a it's somewhat similar, but not as deep and involved as what we obviously do with our clients. But like we teach them about different technology solutions so that they can be as independent as possible. That way I don't have to call my dad, hey, where are that, like, he's 86, like he's a man, right? He's not a child. So I don't have to call and be like, hey, where are you? I can just simply look him up at the app and have peace of mind knowing that he's okay. um and absolutely, like those Apple Watches, and there's all sorts of different different watches now that monitor oxygen and sleeping and falls and safety and GPS type of stuff. So there's so many more resources that we can leverage to help these folks be safe as possible and stay at home as long as possible. Or if they're in a care community, there's no harm in having that fall sensor on their watch either, so that way families know where their loved one is.
Right.
Okay,
So what about things like mobility plan?
mobility plan, so how are they getting around? So how are they walking? Because again, like I said on the last podcast, but if they didn't hear that one, then they're going to be like, what did you say on the last one? So you can
A
tell
teaser.
my Mountain Dew's kicking in. You can really
Yeah.
tell. So I'll be like, so mobility plan is how safe is their home? So it's kind of multi-pronged. So like, how safe is their home? Meaning, do they, a lot of our clients lived in the same house for 50 years and it's got the same carpet and it's all got bubbles in it, or, different types of flooring, and then their walkers get stuck on it and then they go head over heels over their walker. And so looking at the house, like how senior safe is it? Do they have grab bars? Is their furniture high enough or low enough for them? Or what if, like with my dad, he's 6'4", but my mom was 4'10". And so we had a bear of a time trying to make sure that their furniture and their, furniture was the right height. Cause my dad's like super tall, like I am, or like I'm super tall, like he is. And mom was like super short. She's a little munchkin. And so, do they have steps in the house? How unsafe is their house? And so we do a virtual walkthrough. We literally have our clients take us through the house on their laptop, and then I can be like, oh, that rug is curled up, or this is a fall risk, or all those stacks of newspapers or magazines are going to make someone fall, or I notice that you have light bulbs burned out. All of those things can impact their safety at home, because preventing falls is always the goal. So mobility is also, like looking at their arms. Do they have bruises and bumps? Because that can be an indication that they're falling. Looking at the carpet, do they have stains, like blood stains on the carpet? The house, the two most telling rooms, or the three most telling rooms in the house, are the bathroom, because that will tell you how well they are taking care of their toileting needs. Enough said probably about that. The bedroom, because like how are they managing from bed to the bathroom? Are there blood stains or bowel stains on the carpet? Because then that tells you that there's some urgency issues, or maybe not able to get in and out of the bed safely or quickly enough. So what do we need to do differently there? But then the kitchen is the other telling room, because that's where, and this all falls under safety at home anyway, is I encourage the kids to pop open that refrigerator and look at, okay, are they eating expired food? A lot of these people came from the generation where you don't waste anything, and that hamburger, even though it's purple and green, it's still good yet. You just have to cook it longer, right? Well, then you wonder why there's bowel stains all over the carpet. Well, because they're eating bad food or drinking bad milk, or maybe they're eating food that expired 3 years ago. So always pop open that refrigerator and just lovingly. Everything I say is to do it lovingly, because if you go in there with like, you're not safe to be at home anymore, you will get nowhere fast. So mobility is also, because it's all these interrelated things, right? So it's their food, because if they're eating bad food, then they are going to have more falls, because they're not going to be properly nutritioned. Are they drinking enough water? Dehydration and urinary tract infections cause falls, and that's your mobility. Is it simple, like their walker is too low for them or too high for them, and they're walking this way instead of having the walker down at the right level for their arms? Do the wheelchair brakes work? Because maybe they're falling because they plop into their wheelchair and they're not locking the brakes. So that could be a memory thing, or the brakes don't work. So there's all sorts of things that when Care Right families come to us, we have this entire very detailed checklist because we want our loved ones to be safe. Mobility can also be things like not only the structure of the house, but where is everything in the house? Is the house set up properly? Like, I'm from the Midwest where we have basements, and that's where the washers and the dryers are. And so when we look at mobility, we certainly don't want mom taking a header down those stairs with a clothes basket with a cane, right? So
Mm.
like that's a big mobility is just such a big thing. And then you've got what I call the exterior mobility. You would be surprised how many people fall down the driveway trying to get their mail because the driveway is too
Yeah.
sloped. Or in the winter months, it's a little icy and they're frail and they're
It's just
elderly
a
and they're
crack in the sidewalk or
back.
whatever.
It's whatever. And so a lot of people fall and they'll literally roll down their driveway, and then it's the
Mm.
neighbors that find them. And sometimes people freeze to death because in the Midwest, that's not even,
Terrifying.
it is terrifying. And also mobility this is such a, you're like, oh, this will be a
Big.
quick, but it's also their shoes, it's their footwear.
Oh,
So a lot of our little ladies, because they came from, the era of wearing sandals and always looking sharp, whereas like my generation, we're all about the flip flops and comfy shoes. But
Pawns, yeah.
some of these little ladies are still trying to put their little strappy sandals on, and they have no reason to be wearing little strappy sandals. Or maybe their shoes are too small or they're too tight, and so it's their shoes, or they're wearing slippers that don't have a back on them, or shoes that don't have a back on them, more like those like slip-in shoes.
oh,
So it's all sorts of different things that can make someone tumble, and we don't want that. The challenge is, because all the kids are like, oh yeah, we'll do this. That's what's in their aging plan, right? Is footwear, make sure their walker is the right size. Let's get a physical therapy order. Let's have the primary physician write an order for physical therapy, because if you're telling me, family, that dad was able to get up and out of the chair on his own 3 months ago, and now that you're back to visit, 3 months from that, he's having a hard time getting in and out of the chair, or he's more short of breath or winded, let's get him to the doctor. Let's get a therapy order to see, we need to do some strengthening. Unfortunately, most families or most seniors, once they stop doing their activities, like traveling and getting out and about, like our frail elderly, they pretty much just plunk themselves down in front of the recliners and watch TV, and they're not exercising, they're not getting stimulated. So that falls under that socialization, which is kind of up next. So the TV is not an activity. The only thing that engages 100% of our brain, like all of our brain, is actual face-to-face conversation, where we have to use our emotional intelligence and look at expressions and look at body language and like gauge how to converse with people. And when they laugh, we laugh, and those kind of things. So from a mobility and a socialization piece, when they stay seated in those recliners, they're not eating properly, they're not socialized properly, they're not getting enough exercise, and when you're talking about a frail elderly person who maybe uses a walker or some sort of assistive device, they're not going to be cooking, they're not going to get the stove going and the pans going, or they're going to fall. So that's when we start seeing more malnutrition, because they're eating things like I eat because I don't cook: Twinkies, Pringles, licorice. They're eating stuff that you don't have to cook because they don't have the stamina to do it, or maybe they don't have the cognition to do it. They're eating stuff that they can easily open, like the bag of chips, and then that's what they eat. Or they're living on Diet Coke or Diet Pepsi. Well, they're not getting enough water, so they're just not nutritionally healthy. So those are all things that we look at in that aging plan, because if you don't physically take care of yourself and nurture your body with proper nutrition, for any of us, we're just not going to be healthy.
So before we move on to the companionship and socialization, you said something a second ago that I want to probe a little bit, and that's the medications and healthcare. Like, um, you mentioned things that certain medications can dehydrate you. Some there's just a lot to manage there, it seems, and so maybe you can speak a little bit to that. Like, how do you make sure that you don't have competing medications for your parents, where like one is doing something wrong that interacts with another drug and stuff like that?
Yeah. So one of the things that we look at when we have when we're doing our aging plan is what are their medications, and what happens sometimes with our seniors is for a variety of reasons they'll doctor hop. So like if the doctor, you know what I mean by that? They'll doctor hop. They'll go to different doctors
Yeah.
until they get one that will prescribe how they want their medications to be. Or
Yep.
like they're so embarrassed that they have depression and that they are getting that they're getting medication for depression. So they'll go to this pharmacy for antidepressants, but then the other pharmacy for everything else. Well, the thing is, we need to like consolidate all of that. It's just like, Carl, for you, it's like if your client has 6 different financial planners and you don't know that, you assume you're the only one, and you're like, okay,
It's a
well,
disaster.
it's a disaster, right? And
It's
so
really
the same
dangerous.
thing, it's
Yeah.
very dangerous. And so we've got to look at, okay, so does your doctor know what all you're taking? Does your pharmacy, because the pharmacist is really good about making sure that all the medications play nice. And sometimes they haven't had a review done for a long time. So I actually have a pharmacist consultant on my team as well, because this is such a huge problem, the doctor hopping, or just in general. And that's like not to blame the senior, but also just the landscape of healthcare. The days of Ethel having the same doctor for her lifetime are long gone. Now it's like, my dad's been down here for 5 years. He's on his 4th different doctor.
Right?
Yeah.
It's
They
like an
move
annual
around.
event. It's terrible.
Got it. So before you do a case study, maybe you can speak, or maybe you can work into the case study sample the companionship and socialization stuff. So
I do want to touch on that, just kind of outside of the case study a bit. When we also, I mean, those are broad topics, right? So, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the primary caregiver. The primary caregiver, say it's Ethel and she's taking care of Marvin. If they're 80 years old trying to take care of each other, their health isn't holding up. She's probably not getting out and about like she used to. And so it's real. And if Marvin has dementia, what happens when people have dementia is even the closest friends and families, they're not comfortable with that disease, and the behaviors associated with that disease can be very uncomfortable for people if they don't understand dementia. And so what happens is people stop coming by and visiting, and then the primary caregiver gets even that much more isolated, which then leads to depression, anxiety, and their own cognitive impairment. But it's all environmental, right? So once we get enough supports and care in the place, home care coming in and companions coming in, and we aren't a home care company, we're consultants, and we align the care team for our clients, and then we oversee their care. But once they actually have the right supports in place, then that's when you start seeing that primary caregiver start to thrive again.
got it.
Very
Okay,
good.
so you want me
Yes.
to give an alarming case study?
Yes, alarm us.
Scare the bejesus out of your listeners. Okay,
You
and
just
it's
have so
sad.
many of them. I mean,
I do
it's like,
every
which one are you
day.
going to choose from?
I know every day we're working, because they are coming to us in these types of crisis scenarios, unfortunately. But that's why I do a lot of these podcasts, so that the listeners are going to be like, hey, this is hitting home for me. I better reach out to this Annalee
Take
gal,
action. Right.
because we need to talk and get an aging plan in place. So here's an example. So in Naples, Florida, this made national news. And my heart just goes out to this family, still to this day. So what happened is, in Florida is one of the states that has what we call the silver alerts. I believe your state does as well, but it's
You
when,
do.
yeah.
It's
So
like the Amber Alert for
Mhm.
aging adults. Yeah.
There you go.
for memory impaired adults. And so In Florida, we constantly on the interstate is watch out for this white Toyota, because, it's a silver alert. And so what happened is her name is Margaret, made national news, so you can look this up. But she and her husband lived at home in Naples, and she has advanced dementia to the point where she's nonverbal. Okay. But with dementia, we actually should do a podcast all about dementia too. But she's advanced to the point where she's nonverbal, but that doesn't mean she's physically impaired, because these folks with dementia, it's their brain, it's a brain disease. So their brain is shrinking. And when that's your control center for your whole body and how you perceive, reality and your emotions and communicate and know when you're hungry and make safe decisions, when that brain is shrinking like that, you should expect changes in their mood, behavior, personality, verbal ability, mobility, all of that kind of stuff. So they're living at home on their own, and we'll just call them Marvin and Margaret. So he went into a room into their house and turned his back for just a short time. And if you knew dementia at all, they have a very short attention span and they can move very quickly. And when they get something in their head, if they aren't redirected, if the person doesn't know how to redirect them and get them off that topic and into something else, they do what's called eloping. And typically in the afternoons, it's called sundowning, when someone with memory impairment becomes more confused, more agitated, more paranoid, more restless, more tearful. Like there is a sudden change in their behavior. They can get very restless and pace and wander and agitated and violent and aggressive sometimes. Anyway, so she wandered away and she was missing for 6 days. 6 days. He's terrified and feels guilty because, of course, he feels responsible for her, right? Because she is a vulnerable adult. And so he's feeling awful because he's like, where is she? She's missing for 6 days. The neighborhood started looking at their Ring cameras. And so there's footage of Margaret walking into a neighbor's garage, but there's no footage of her leaving the garage. And what happens in Florida is a lot of the snowbirders come down around holiday time, Thanksgiving, Christmas. They get their condos ready. Then they go back up north for the holiday, and then they come back down in like January-ish. And so this person didn't know that she was in the garage. And so he backed out and was driving up north. So long story short, they're like, where is Margaret? And the police couldn't find her. This made national news. And so through the course of looking at all these Ring cameras, they realized that she came in this garage and she never came back out. Well, she has memory impairment, so there's no way that she knew to just simply push the garage door button and have it come up. And even if she would have, a lot of the snowbirders, they'll put like a bracket so that nobody can
you
break.
Lock the door, yeah.
Yeah, so they can't so even if she did push the button, she wouldn't have been able to get it open anyway. And what they also do is they lock the interior house to the garage door. So she's like literally stuck in there. And, it's, even though it's November, it's still really hot down here and there's no air movement. Most of these garages don't have windows. And so she couldn't get out. And so finally they're like, she never came out of this garage. And so they get the homeowner, and most of the garages down here, they have the code to like open up the door. And so they opened up the door, and there she is on the floor in the garage, totally dehydrated. So in 6 days, she didn't have anything to drink, anything to eat. And when they're that far along in the dementia disease progression, they have medication for them, right? Because there is going to be sundowning, there's going to be behaviors, anxiety, agitation. So for 6 days, and most of these meds, you can't just stop. Like you can't just stop them, right? And so 6 days, no meds, no food, no water, probably petrified, because she's like, how do I get out of here? Where am I? Where's my family? And it's dark, it gets dark at night. And so I just can't imagine how terrified she had to have been, and how terrified the family was, because she is a dependent adult. And so here's why an aging plan is important, because if this family would have had an aging plan, the family would have understood the disease progression, that she is a risk for wandering and what we call elopement. They would have had enough home care supports in place so that the husband wasn't so overwhelmed, and so that the wife, so that Margaret had companions and had someone to take care of her, so that her husband could just be the husband and rest, because he's in his 80s. If this family would have had an aging plan that we do, they would have already had that care matrix done to know which care communities had a secured memory care unit, and would have had her on the waiting list of 3 or 4 different memory care facilities, so that when this time comes, because it's not a matter of if, it is a matter of when this disease is going to progress even more, she would have already been on the waiting list of different care communities. If this family would have had an aging plan and their Care Right grab and go binder, because remember I started my company, one of the reasons is because these families they're not talking about what they have in order with the state docs and documents and long-term care insurance and accounts and passwords. And so they would have had a grab and go binder, but because she's not decisional, and there was no power of attorney in place, then Nate, what that means. And
Guardianship. Right.
yep, down in Florida, it's roughly 15 to 20 grand for emergency guardianship. And if they would have had an aging plan in place, they would have also been, as a family, in agreement on when would it have been the right time for mom to move into a care facility, so that dad, the primary caregiver, doesn't die trying to take care of her. Meaning that 65% of primary caregivers over the age of 60 have a 65% mortality rate, simply because of caregiver burnout and fatigue. And if they would have had an aging plan, the whole family would have been properly supported. We would have been the care advocate. We would have made sure that this wouldn't have happened, because they would have had enough supports in place, and we would oversee the care. So what happened, the consequence of not having an aging plan and having all of this stuff happen, is it took this incident, a near-death experience, for the family to wake up and be like, oh, I guess she's more demented than we thought. Oh, I guess staying at home is just with dad isn't working out for either one of them. Oh, we didn't realize we should have had estate documents in order. Well, now they just shelled out almost 20 grand because they didn't have their documents in order. She ended up in a memory care facility that had an open bed. And that doesn't mean that that's a good fit. That just means that facility had an open bed. And when we work with our clients, we're like, here's the pros and cons to these different care communities. Because now she ended up in what we call a standalone memory care facility. So now if something happens to the husband, she's not in a care community that has another level of care. So it's what we call a standalone memory care. So that's all they offer there. So when things happen to the husband and his health declines, he's going to end up in a different facility, and they won't see each other again because the kids don't live nearby. Right.
Yeah.
So that's the downside of not having an aging plan. And all of this could have been prevented had they had an aging plan and had all of these supports in place, had an actual plan, knew where she would be going when she needed care. But instead, the mistakes families make are always consistent. Denial that mom and dad are doing as bad as they are. Denial or assuming, I shouldn't say always denial, but mostly, but assuming they have more time to put a plan in place or figure things out. Well, you don't. You run out of time quickly. Example, I just had a family consult, because I do a 30-minute free consult for families. I did this free consult with this family in November, when the things that because on the 30-minute consult, we get a lot of information, like what's working, what's not, and he's like, I'm just so burned out. I'm overwhelmed. I'm already having like heart palpitations on my own. I'm not sleeping very well because I got to sleep with one ear and one eye open, because she gets up at night and wanders around, and I'm afraid she's going to get out because she got out before. And so, even when they're saying this, I'm like, you are in crisis. Like you need an aging plan. Like now you're in crisis planning, but there's so much denial and so much pushback, and they think that they have more time. Well, then they just called last week and they're like, oh, she's declining faster than what we thought. Well, she was already declining, but they don't understand the disease, and they don't understand the path that they're on. And they wouldn't, because they're in uncharted territory. But I'm here to tell you, because we do special needs planning as well, that when we have parents that have a special needs child, they research the crap inside and outside of that diagnosis. So they know exactly what that diagnosis is going to do to their child. But when we as adults have a parent who gets a diagnosis of, Lewy body disease or Parkinson's disease, they don't do their research. And so they're completely blindsided when mom wanders away and she's missing for 6 days. So that's why we do what we do, because these families are falling through the cracks with the healthcare system, and that's despicable. And on my watch, that's not going to happen.
Powerful story, Annalee. Powerful story. Really, just definitely a motivator.
Absolutely got me thinking.
I think Nate's going to do more than think. I think he's going to take some action here, and I know you and I already are. So this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for another great podcast. Holy cow. We definitely have to bring you back on. I love the idea about just a podcast or a series of them on just dementia and the stories you have there, and the advice for all of us who are both seeing our friends and families, go through it, but even just the stories we know about other people who are going through it should motivate us to, put a plan together, if nothing else.
You guys can appreciate this too, because you see it in your line of work. But like because the grab and go binder is again created because when I was still an employee, these families had no idea what their parents had in order, accounts, passwords. And so what happens, and I'm sure you guys see this all the time too, but mom and dad may or may not have their estate documents in order. So if they do, they're probably outdated because they did them like 20 years ago. And that daughter that they named as the power of attorney, turns out she's a gambler or a hooker or whatever.
All the time. Hopefully neither of those, but yes, they could be close.
And so
she could even be married to an overbearing husband or something.
Imagine that happens. Oh Lord.
And so it's like we're not obviously attorneys, but we're like, and we're not like meeting with our clients face to face because they're on Zoom, but we're like, okay, review your documents. Do the people that you named 20 years ago, do you still trust them to make decisions for you?
Right.
Are they still competent, or did you name your sister and now she's, in the throes of Parkinson's disease?
Same thing.
Also a dementing illness, so let's look at those and do they need to be refreshed and updated? So if they don't have an attorney, then I can point them in the direction of someone that I would know and trust. And Nate, that's why I'm super glad to meet you as well. But the other thing that families do or parents don't do is they don't communicate. So say the best case scenario is they have these documents, but they never told their kids about it, because when I'm asking my kids,
all the time,
the kids on the family meeting, well, who's the power of attorney? I don't know. Are you? I don't know. Are you? And so they may have the documents, but they didn't communicate it and they didn't provide their kids with a copy. And then how can you expect, this is kind of a scolding, just say it because I'm old enough to be probably half these people's parents. But the thing is, how can you expect a power of attorney to do their job when you didn't give them the tools they need to do their job? So for example, if you named your daughter to be your financial power of attorney, but you didn't give her the document, you've never had any conversation, she has no idea what accounts and passwords you have. She has no idea what your insurance policies are, or if you even have insurance, or she doesn't even know your financial planner, or she doesn't know what system you have in place to pay bills. Because these are all the complaints that I get from the kids, right? Well, they named me the power of attorney, but I don't even know what bills come out of what account, or if they have them set up on auto pay, or if this goes on the credit card or whatever. And then the same falls true as well for the healthcare power of attorney. They might get their power of attorney documents done, or their healthcare proxies, depending on what state they live in, but they didn't give them any guidance on what your wishes are. Well, we'll figure it out at the time. Well, you are not going to be figuring it out at the time when you have a trach down your throat, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even for me, because I have spent a fair amount of my time in ICU units, hospitals, and nursing homes, and I am very, very clear on what quality of life means to me. So I have 2 pages of addendums in my power of attorney that my attorney was like, what the heck? I've been an attorney for 30 years and I've never seen anybody be like, this is what I want, this is what I don't want. I said, well, these are conversations you should be having in more detail with your clients so that it's all spelled out. And then what I do, because I don't have kids and I don't have I don't have anybody, so it's my 2 siblings are my power of attorney. I've normalized these conversations. So every year we talk about it. And because I travel a fair amount, because I'm an international speaker on aging issues, I'm always like sending an email. Just remember, if something happens, no feeding tube ever, like not even for a second. Like don't let the doctor talk you into it. I don't want that. I don't want a trach. I don't want anything. And so we have to normalize these conversations and not be so scary, because that's what gives us control.
Mm-hmm.
Great stuff. Great advice. There's another podcast just on that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, Annalee, this is so great to see you again. Thank you so much, my friend. It's great to have you aboard.
Yeah.
Very nice to meet you. Thank you.
And, we'll
This
talk
was
again
fun.
soon. Yeah.
This was fun.
Fun for you. Trachs. Feeding tubes.
Yeah, trach feeding tubes.
On that note, have a great night.
Yeah.
On
I
that
can
note,
imagine how much
everybody,
fun
be
you are
well.
on a Great.
You
Friday
ever
night.
hang out with tax attorneys? I mean, come on. Be a rip-roaring party.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Well, as we always do, we wish you to create a beautiful day. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning into the Care Right podcast. We hope today's discussion has provided you with valuable insights. If so, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our podcast with others who might find it helpful. Remember, Care Right is more than just a podcast. It's a community dedicated to supporting family caregivers with comprehensive care planning, crisis management, and resources for every stage of aging. Stay connected with us for future episodes as we continue to explore essential topics in aging planning, elder care, and financial planning. Until next time, take care, plan wisely, and remember, you're not alone in your caregiving journey.